And we're live. Finally made it on time for once. Today we're going to be talking about LiberNull and Psychonautica where it talks about Shamanism and then Gnosticism and Priestcraft. Okay. So, everyone a chance to get over here. Made it on time, but I kind of ran into the room, so I'm a little out of breath at the moment. Well, not real breath, but you know, calm. Okay, so like I said, it's LiberNull and Psychonaut, Shamanism, Gnosticism, and Priestcraft. And tonight I'm actually not going to be drinking. Last Saturday I think I got a little excessive, so we're going to stick to water today. I'm also not wearing my typical robe for two reasons. One, it has gotten rather warm here, and this is a lot thinner. Hey, Romstead, good to see you. And the other is that, um, well, it wasn't that bad, but the part on shamanism kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Hey, Black Unigriffin, glad to see you. Um, as I was just saying, I'm not going to be. I'm actually not drinking tonight. I feel like last Saturday I got a little. Got a little too drunk. I didn't. I don't think I made. I don't think I behaved badly, really, but I was definitely too drunk to do some of the stuff. So we're not going to be drinking tonight. We're gonna slow down on that some from now on. Anyways, like I said, I'm wearing these robes tonight, my actual plurbics rather than my novice robes, because, well, for one, it's really hot out tonight today, and that's just too thick. And number two, the shamanism part of this, even though it wasn't that bad, it was a bit, I guess, cliche, and it just kind of really rubbed me the wrong way. And I didn't feel like being wearing novice robes while talking about my feelings about his the treatment of shamanism that is given in this book and in the general magical culture. So we're in the plurbics. Okay. Um let's see. I feel like there's a little more I wanted to address. Oh, the tri-op that I showed last week. I think I mentioned that a lot of times right after I publish something with them, they tend to die off for some reason. It's almost immediately after. It was a few days, and that one was quite old. Honestly, I was already suspecting that it was getting close to the end of its life cycle, but it did pass after that. So that's the end of that. Its body didn't do well either, so we're actually not going to be able to do the next stage with it. So excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Excellent advice on the servitors for my dreams and stuff. Really a huge difference, Tal. Thanks. I am very happy to hear that. That's awesome. Um, yeah, so the triops did not work out very well, but we're gonna step it up. We're going to step up to a little bit more complicated life forms. I'm gonna start putting shrimps in the tank, and we might upgrade to guppies. If so, they will actually be here in the studio, so we'll be able to see them in the background during the lives and different videos that I do sometimes. So, yeah, that's my servitor updates. I've been working on and meditating on the scripts and reprogramming since the 1900 since the 19s, and it and did a whole solstice midsummer meditation on it. Awesome. Yeah, so the shamanism portion of the book, like, you know, there wasn't really anything all that bad. The horde shows up a lot. Lively bunch. Excellent. Okay, where were we? Yeah, the shamanism that shows up in the book. I mean, he's correct. There is this, it is the deep well from which all religion, philosophy, and really probably almost all science originally stems from. Somebody doing what at the time would have been considered shamanism, even perhaps s- creating fire in the first place was most likely some someone with a religious or shamanistic um, intention. And the first person to create fire, I'm sure they saw this as a magical thing, a spiritual thing, and everyone that worked on the making of fire in the beginning very much saw it as, oh, okay, you got to go. Well, it's good to see you. Hopefully, we'll catch you later and have fun with your parents. Hello, Felix. Yeah. So, like I said, it's there is a commonality, a common theme, and in the different forms of shamanism, and it does extend even to the idea of horned beings in a lot of cultures. That one isn't quite as universal as he makes it out to be, but it can certainly be identified on every continent. Even my great grandfather, he had a helmet with horn. Well, not a helmet. He had a his medicine hat had buffalo horns coming out the side, and that is a traditional headdress for the Manitou or the Medouin. Now, like I said, this is one area where I do, this is what I was raised into. And speaking of the drinking, that's got me thinking. Like I said, I'm not going to be drinking tonight. And then I was thinking about that in relation to the shamanism. And most of the stuff I learned was drunken told to me very drunk when I was a young child. And I mean, there's always been that barrier there. So that's another reason I think it's good that I'm not drinking on this particular live because at least for me, there's something there. Like my dad doesn't really talk about this stuff much unless he is drunk. So even with my dad, the things that he has told me, almost all of them, I was told by someone who was drunk. And yeah. Anyways, back to the shamanism in general. He didn't even bring up the idea that it is working with the primal forces and the idea that we are seeing life in everything and the interconnected web of all things that come with the paradigm of shamanism. You got your animism in there, and I was taught that everything has an existence. Everything, not everything has a full awareness, right? But everything has an existence. Everything has a backstory. Everything has its part of the weaving, and like when people say things like the rocks can hear and the rocks have memories. They're not saying that the rocks are perceiving. It's like when I was talking about one of my earlier videos with ghosts. Some of them, places have memories, right? And that's part of the tapestry. And he did talk about how there's all these different layers of astral realms, but I don't know. I feel like he just, you got like, what is it, 2.5 pages here, and then he acknowledges in there that it is the beginning point of all occult ritual, all magic. It all comes from the well of learning that is shamanism. These are the first shoulders that we are standing upon to get higher. But then he just gives it a cursory conversation, and I I have a lot to say about these things. I did say last week that once we got to the shamanism, I was going to have a lot to say about this particular thing. Now, my first issue is with the word shaman in and of itself. I do not consider myself a shaman. Um, that being said, I do have traditional, um, I guess you would say, role placed upon me. Like I don't have a role in my culturally. Like there's nothing that I have to do back at my grandmother's reservation or anything like that. I don't have that kind of a role, and that's part of the idea of shamanism. But we'll get to that in a moment. Shaman is a Siberian guy. That's a guy from the Yakut tradition, and they are a perfect example, right? The Siberian shaman is a perfect example. They have the Hormid helmets. They use the rhythm to get into trance. They use different things to connect themselves to that web and get themselves out of themselves far enough to see what is going on, and will even astral project to find different things that the people are asking for, find cures for things, even figure out where the I'm not sure if there's reindeer in Siberia or not, but they do all the traditional bits like that about finding where the game is and all of that. So I am not saying that um, the Yakut aren't someone that are in that tradition in any way, but shaman is their word, right? For my people, or the words that were passed down to me, are Manitou and Medouin. And these are two different things. And neither one of them fit that description quite right, but there is the pieces, right? So this is why I said I've never called myself a shaman, because I don't have anything from that tradition. What I do have is the word Manitou, which is something that it means many things. You could One of the words that it fits is that shaman role, but I see it more as sorcerer. Like the way the full word is defined, it's more like sorcerer, right? And it also means mystery. It means energy itself, spirit. It also means turtle, apparently. Um, and that is larger than what they talk about here as shamanism. And many of these things are in all of these traditions. Like one of the things that is most people leave aside or don't seem to grasp is, well, the law of aesthetics is very much at play in the shamanistic paradigm. The idea that everything has reason and beauty to it. There is a story being told. That's why I mentioned earlier about how everything, it doesn't have an existence, but it has a backstory. Part of the idea of shamanism is that we are in a big myth. We are walking in magic at all times. This isn't something from the past. Like he said, oh, we talk about how the ancients had much more knowledge. And yes, they did. But that is not really how it is passed in. It is passed on that we are still walking in this thing. And the magic is still there, waiting, growing. I mean, there is some idea that it used to be stronger in that it will return. In fact, there's a prophecy that I've been told since I was a child about Gitchi Manitou, because Manitou means spirit, sorcerer, turtle. Gitchi means great, cosmic. So Gitchi Manitou is the cosmic, the great sorcerer, the great spirit, the big mystery, you know, and in his form as a being, it is said that when Christianity came here and the magic began to decrease, Ichimonatu saw what was going on and knew that he couldn't deal with it then, so he stomped his foot on Mackinac Island and cracked the island in half. And then he went up north to prepare. And then one day he will return. And the first thing he'll do is stomp on that island. It'll split in two and sink into the water. And that will be the moment that we know Ichimonatu has returned. But because he is the great mystery, the great spirit, we're not really talking about a being here. So when you're fully understanding it, you have to understand there's a lot of metaphor involved in the teachings of shamanism and the mythology that is in there. There is an understanding of metaphor, but also an understanding that metaphor can come to life. Just because something is a metaphor does not mean it isn't real. That's one of the key cornerstones of magic in general, in all of its forms, is that metaphors can take on life. That is how we do magic, is by creating symbols, metaphors for purposes and intents. These create forms. And these metaphors, these forms, the more they work within the flow and poetry of a moment, the better they are going to work, the more magic they are going to have, the more they combine with the mythology of yourself. One of the times this is talked about has been talked a lot about to me is with the idea of hunting and the story of the hunt, and how you need to have a good story in order to have a good hunt. You need to have a good, well, mythology of what you were doing. And some parts of it are kind of funny. Like, I have several cousins that won't take food with them when they're going hunting because that's part of the story. If they have food on them, then they must not need food bad enough to go hunting. And so they believe it takes away part of the luck because it changes the story. It changes what the spirit is weaving around you, not the spirits, right? Now, there are spirits that you might interact with. Absolutely, with shamanism, there are spirits that you interact with, and different animal spirits. But there is also the spirit, the weaving of reality. This the great spirit isn't a being so much as a interconnectedness. It's a part of an understanding of the all thing, right? So that's one of the most important things that he's leaving out to me is the idea of the weaving of the litany of all the history and story that goes into every moment of every motion that we take. And this is one of the key aspects of shamanism that he is leaving out. Now, he did talk a bit about um, connecting with animal spirits and that sort of thing, but you know, this is another area where, well, cultural appropriation, right? People are so worried about cultural appropriation. My great grandfather believed that everyone had an animal spirit. Everyone had some form of animal spirit. Now, just deciding, oh, that's my animal spirit and going with it, uh, you may get it right, right? But you're not really connecting with that. And there are ways to go about learning your animal spirit. And most of, it doesn't have to be a particular way. You just have to find that moment, achieve gnosis. For myself, my original understanding of my animal spirit actually came after a moment of fear where I was chasing what I thought was a deer in a ravine. And there's all these pine cones down there, so I could hear its feet moving, and I thought it was a deer crunching in the pine cones. And I'm running along the top, kind of chasing along with it, and it was going in there having trouble moving. That's so I could keep up with it, but I couldn't see it. I could just hear it moving up ahead of me, and then I hear it get stuck. Like it must have hit some rocks or like a stick jam because it made a frustrated sound, and it wasn't a deer sound; it was a cat sound. I'd been chasing a cougar. And I, my heart starts beating and I'm going. And in this moment, I'm like, well, I got to get out of here. But I don't run, right? I grab a stick and I put it over my shoulder and I start walking away calmly. The stick over my shoulder was made to look like I had a gun. And I started walking away calmly. But as I'm doing this, of course, my adrenaline is pumping. And when I get back to camp, I'm just completely in this state of I wouldn't quite call it fear gnosis because I've gone beyond fear. I'm in that moment of clarity, of once fear gets to that point, like everything almost seems slow motion. I'm basically there. And when I get to camp, there's this least weasel, like, a little tiny weasel. And I see in its eyes, and in that moment, we connected. And I felt it. And I understood my connection to the weasel. And I've had many things since then that have confirmed that. And, we also have more than one spirit that connects to us. There is your spirit animal, and then there is your war spirit, which is, for me, the weasel is kind of both. But then there's, uh, it gets complicated. It gets weird and complicated the more you have these spirits. But there is another one that I saw actually after one of my rituals where I go up into the mountains and, well, not we do into the mountains here, but I go up into the mountains at the time to a crossroads I had on paths where I'd have a circle of stones that I would not eat or drink except for in the circle of stones. But in this time, well, it's a ceremonial place. This time around, I was there with different intentions, so I was able to leave the next day. But after I had worked the ceremony that I was doing, that I'm not going to be talking about, as I was leaving and crossing part of the mountain, I came across a large blue grouse that flew up into the trees. And as it did, I felt that same type of moment, the same type of connection, but not in the same way, right? This isn't my animal spirit. This is my mother's spirit. This is a spirit that nurtures me. And the grouse told me that I am your mother's spirit. And this is actually the blessing that it gave me, which is a valuable blessing to me. It told me that I will not, because I am connected to it, I will never starve to death, though I may not always like what I have to eat. So a little ominous in some ways, I feel like that particular blessing, but won't ever starve to death. That's a certainly a positive side to that. So I take it as a blessing rather than like a bad omen. But this is type of thing where these connections come from. Um, you can use other methods like the circle of stone method that I mentioned. I don't actually recommend that, but this is one of the ways to traditionally see your spirit. What I saw on my own um, moment like that is what complicates as to whether the weasel is my spirit animal or really just my warrior spirit. But some things I'm not really allowed to talk about. That's another thing that he totally left out of the with the shamanism is that flair for secrecy that we talk about in magic. It is exceptionally important in certain aspects of shamanism. You are also blessed with the willingness to eat things many won't. This is true. Oh, hey, Ricky. Glad to see you here. So, I mean, this is a fair point. I am willing, if one, if one is willing to eat things, one isn't going to starve. But in my defense, ant larvae are delicious. Anyone that won't eat ant larvae hasn't tried ant larvae, in my opinion. But I get the unwillingness. Anyways, let's see. What else? What else am I saying here? So there's the animal spirits, like I said. Oh, secrecy. I was going into the secrecy. The idea of secrecy and that flair for secrecy that we see in a lot of other magical traditions. That does start way back in the shamanism. Your power bundles are often kept secret. Well, there are ones that you keep secret, like the ones that I was told was a wampum pouch, and then later found out wampum means money, so I suppose they're just talking about value. But that's the pouch that you keep things that are close to your heart, and you don't tell anyone what is in that pouch. There are other magical pouches that you don't tell anyone about. The only ones you do let people see are the ones where the things inside are things you were taking out to work with people. Other than that, those things are kept secret. And there are things about some of your vision quests that are supposed to be kept secret. Like you can say what your spirit animal is from your vision quest, but you're not really supposed to talk a lot about what happened during that quest. Mine got oddly complicated, which is why I just don't talk about it at all. I'll just say what I saw was something that essentially is a part of secrecy. So, anyways, um, I have a lot more to say here on the shamanism, and not as much to say on the Gnosticism when we get to it. I've never really studied the Gnosticism, but we're probably going to skip ahead to that in a minute here, and then come back to the priestcraft, and then come back to the shamanism a bit more because I don't want to keep harping on it. Okay, so I do want to cover a few more things. On that being said, I do want to cover a few more things on the shamanism before we slip into the Gnosticism. Okay, what else do I want to say about it? I mentioned earlier the idea that when they say the rocks here they aren't exactly talking about the rocks being self-aware, right? What they are talking about is that everywhere, well, I don't know if perceives is the right word, but everywhere, places have memory. This is an this is extremely important. Oh, hey, Max. Great. Maybe you can help me out a bit with the Gnostic stuff. By the time I got into magic, I was well, fully besides the shamanism stuff, obviously. By the time I started looking for magic outside of my eternal understanding, I already had a really bad taste for Christianity at all. So the Gnosticism, I mean, I know some stuff about Gnosticism. It's certainly it certainly seems interesting, but it's an area I've never really just feel that don't feel like it's gonna vibe with me. Okay, so what did I have? A few more things I wanted to cover real quick. Yeah, we want to. That's one thing I want to be understood. Now, at the same time, if you go up and talk to a rock, doesn't mean necessarily that it's not going to answer because everything has memories, right? And the wind is another matter, as is the water. Everything has its own um, personality to it. The elements in this idea have personalities. The wind is mischievous. The wind can be very boastful. It can be calm, but this idea of the wind being mischievous is personified in a guy called Manabozho, and he's the son of the north wind and a mortal woman. The wind blew up her skirt and got her pregnant. So it's even like, you know, just the touch of the Christianity there because it's almost an immaculate conception thing. But either way, he is a trickster god, and he's like one of the primary gods of all the stuff I've been taught. I tend to just call him Bozo, like as a familiarity thing. And Felix will sometimes hear me going, "Come on, knock it off, Bozo!" If the wind's blowing crazy, but the wind is thought to be mischievous, and but it can also be made deals with. The water deals can be made with the water, but it is flowing most often more predictable. In fact, a lot of times when you're dealing with the water, you're talking about to the water about controlling the stuff in it, you know? Like even the rogue waves in the Great Lakes that people would go down and do prayers to the water for. One was talking about those particular waves. We asked to keep the great sturgeon away. That's one thing in Hiawatha, in that whole Hiawatha story that is real. The great sturgeon was a thing. We believe that there was a big sturgeon that would come up and take your boat under with these rogue waves. So, or at least that's what we use as the metaphor, right? Like I said, metaphors come to life. Metaphors are used as symbols to interact with different aspects. So, when we were asking the Great Lakes for safe passage, part of what would be going on there would be we're appeasing that rogue wave by envisioning it as a giant sturgeon. And I don't know, like I said, it wasn't. so much that he offended me with any of the stuff he said about shamanism. He just so rounded off. I knew I was gonna have a lot to say. I expected to be more offended, honestly, with some of the other stuff I've come across in here. In a bit, we're gonna get into Gnosticism, and there's something he says in there that just cracked me right up, and I don't think he's even trying to be funny. Okay, so let's get into Gnosticism. I think that's where he said the line. Oh, maybe it was in Priestcraft. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and would the sturgeon be equivalent to the personality of that aspect of water? Yes, in a way. It's a way to give it, well, it gives it a personality, right? It's giving it a form and a personality so that we can reason with it. Without that, perhaps it's just a wave, without us believing it as a fish. It's like in the Hog's Father. What will the sun be in what will happen if the Hog's father dies? The sun will not rise in the morning, only a bright glowing orb of gas, which I massacred the quote. But that isn't you know, there's a lack of clarity there as to where that order is, right? Is it just is the metaphor creating the personality, or is the personality there for the metaphor? I mean, because it's an unexpected wave. A fellow sorcerer told me they love me and I am like a sibling to them. The same day they moved out and left a wall in my home covered in black mold, which took an hour to clean from the wall. What the hell? That Wow, that's quite the thing. Can you tell me how to activate your magic sigils? Do you mean sigils in general? Because they're as easy as drawing them out with allowing your energy to flow down into them. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the general gist. Yeah, I wouldn't be thrilled about it either, Max. That is wow. Where did you know they were going to be moving out? Like, were they planning to move out, or they just told you that and then buggered off? So, yeah, with sigils, there's lots of ways to activate them. Okay, so they didn't like just move out all of a sudden out of nowhere. So you like parted on really so basically you parted on good terms, but then they left you a wall of mold. That sucks. So the Gnosticism, like I said, this isn't something that I've spent a whole lot of time working on or working with. I have read some of the Gospel of Timothy or Thomas Timothy. I have read some of the Gospel of Thomas, which was kind of fun. Um, Probably could have drawn me in if I didn't have that other paradigm of the shamanism stuff to turn to when I left behind Christianity. odd spot to itch. Oh, a mosquito got me behind my ear earlier. That sucks. So, um, like I said, it probably could have drawn me in, but I had the shamanism stuff to already pull me in that direction. I mean, I studied all kinds of other religions. The Gnosticism, as soon as I saw the Christianity back in there, like, nope. But I do like the idea. It's an interesting paradigm on Christianity. The idea that the actual God is a bastard, you know, and Jesus is kind of like, maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but it's like God made the, well, no, because there's the demiurge. The whole thing is it not one I fully understand, and he talks about the lack of rationality. But anyways, tell your best, like your best way to charge a sigil. Okay. Yeah, like I said, the Gnosticism is there's some good bits here, like it sounds like they understand the idea of the nothing and the edge of the nothing, like with the S1 ritual. No conception of God or the ultimate or whatever was infinite enough. They considered the supreme being was completely ineffable and beyond anything that could be said of it. So I guess then Yahweh, that's the demi. Yeah, okay. So the demiurge or whatever creates everything, and then you've got Jesus, which is that being then incarnated into the world he's created and realizing that he really fucked up and there was so too much suffering in the world. Oh, the demiurge. There are some who say that my God Samael is among his names. I don't see Samael as how Yahweh is described personally. Yeah. Like I say, I have a very lay understanding of the entire bit. Like, one critique that I have for this whole section, he doesn't say anything about how to do this stuff. The shamanism or the Gnosticism, he doesn't give any useful information, really. And to me, that's the whole point of chaos magic, especially in the early part, was finding the useful pieces within systems and making it all work for you. So I don't understand why it's not like, okay, well, this is the useful bits of these things. I just remember something I wanted to talk about, clear back with the shamanism. We'll get back to that. We will get back to that. So he talked about poetic allegories in Gnosticism, though, but then didn't talk about it in shamanism, even though he acknowledges that Gnosticism gets its, like all religion, originally resulted from shamanism. But anyways, so I mean, it's kind of makes me feel a little bit better about Christianity if you think, oh man, God incarnated onto earth and found out that he wasn't um infallible, right? Found out he was creating way too much suffering and needed to help people find a way out. But at the same time, why didn't that affect the bigger one? Why doesn't he come back and be like, okay, well, now that I know these things, now after I've died, Like, clearly I'm missing something. Like I said, I just don't have a lot of knowledge to speak on Gnosticism. I get the basic idea. He makes it sound kind of interesting. Seems like it's in the end you're trying to unmake the universe and we're all going to be reabsorbed back into essentially nirvana. So it's like Buddhism with a whole bunch of extra steps ultimately. If I understand the whole thing. But again, it's not something I've studied much. And I guess it wasn't here that he says the thing. It must be in the Priestcraft. 46 minutes in already. Let's see. Where'd my water go? I would say it's a little harder to relax without the alcohol, but I mean, I'm good. You know, certainly not stressed out at this point. I'm relaxed now. It took me a little longer to slide in. The Gnostic Gospel of Judas has Jesus telling Judas to betray him. Completely changes the symbolism of Judas to depict him as a sympathetic character. I like that. Gnostic Gospel. It's entertaining. I mean, I would imagine Judas's gospel would try to say, yeah, yeah, no, Jesus told me to do that. But also at the same time, I mean, makes sense. Makes total sense because without that, Jesus doesn't get his thing, right? He doesn't get his moment. He doesn't get his moment of death and rebirth that brings the story along and completes the cycle. Especially if it's an all knowing God, then at the very least, if he didn't tell Judas to do it, he knew Judas was going to and didn't stop him. I mean, he says that, you know. There's a metal album by the Lord of the Lost called Judas. The whole album is based on that Gnostic gospel. Right on. Yeah, I mean it makes sense. I mean, Jesus tells him he knows who's going to do it, and then he doesn't stop him. He doesn't like use his magical powers to seal Judas's mouth shut, right? So, at the very least, he knew he was going to do it and didn't stop him. If he didn't create it, he allowed it to happen, right? If the whole story is true, which I don't think it is clearly, but well, I don't think Christianity in general. But anyways, um feel like there's more here that I want to say. Just thought- It's just something about the Apollonian. Oh no, that's not the Apollonian. Dionysian. That would have been interesting. I would have remembered that. So yeah, I mean, it seems like there's some valuable tools that could be learned in Gnosticism. Just like I believe nihilism is a tool that leads us to absurdism, you know, and there definitely seem to get the concept of the infinite and unknowability of the ultimate universe, but trying to become nothing, trying to uncreate everything with that understanding. I don't know. So that seems like the opposite goal. I don't know. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about Gnosticism. That's about as good as I can do. So that's that about the Gnosticism. Occult priestcraft, emotional engineering. I don't like the word he used. For one, that wasn't so good. Emotional engineering, that just doesn't leave a good feeling with the word. But what he's talking about is allowing people, getting people to be ugh, stuttering over top of myself. This is what I'm like when I'm not drinking. So, emotional engineering. Like I said, I don't care for the word he's using, and even the way he talks about it sounds a little manipulative. You know, he talks about controlling your own emotions. That is valuable. And he talks again, this whole portion that we've read over this time, he talks a lot about describing stuff, but not a lot of explaining how. So he says you should be able to create emotion in people. And it's true. If you're going to be doing priestcraft, if you're going to be doing anything like that, which is part of the things that is traditionally part of the shamanistic role, throughout Peter Carroll's writing, manipulation seems to be a common theme. Yes, yes, this is true. Oh, we're going to need to spend some time discussing what book to do next. I think I said I was going to do a poll and then I never did because I'm horrible that way. But yeah, we're going to have like maybe two more meetings with this book and then we'll need to come up with something. I'm kind of considering suggesting reading the full never ending story as a magical tome. But yeah, so he should have said something about how to cause an emotional reaction if he's going to talk about it being a necessary part of this thing that he calls priestcraft. And yeah, that could be used for manipulation, so maybe it's a good thing he didn't say a whole lot. But could have at least talked about mirroring emotion, and that whatever emotion you put out tends to be received by seems to be received and reciprocated by the people that you were speaking to, and a few things like that, because he wants you to be able to do it. Now that is very true. You walk up to someone and you're angry, even if you're not angry at them, they're going to pick up on that and either respond angrily in kind, or in an angry manner, just start getting angry as well, even not necessarily at you. But if you come up to people and you're angry, that's going to mirror in the person. And if you uh, act with confidence, people tend to believe that you have confidence in what you're doing. That, however, is foolish, in my opinion. Unless they have credentials to back it up, someone sounding confident to me is one of the things I'm immediately like, they really know what they're doing. 'Cause confidence does not necessarily mean competence, but people translate it that way, right? And it's the same if you're walking up and you're feeling a little bit of afraid, people can pick up on that. And you're in a situation where where they feel like there might be a reason to be afraid, they're going to get more afraid. This is one of the areas where it does matter. In If you're doing the priestcraft thing, if you're trying to take on a role of caring for someone in a moment where they are afraid, or you're like if you're talking someone down that is having a bad experience, you want to portray calm. And to do that, you just have your voice slow down, be calm, portray calmness. Even if for some reason you're not feeling it, simply expressing it, looking that way will cause calmness in the person that you were talking to. In a moment, we're going to talk about how to get that calm, how to have some control over your emotions, because that's the other bit he talks about here. But this is how that works, right? He didn't talk about how to do it at all. He simply said that you should be able to do it, and then talked how controlling your own emotions and make you free of everything. And like it was the easiest thing in the world to do. There are things you can do that help. There was a bit more I wanted to say here about that. And that is I'm having trouble getting to see how I feel like this relates to the emotional engineering. I hate that word. But how would I say this? How does it relate? So anyways, the important bit here is a lot of people when you're especially when you're first interacting with them, it's not they don't react to who you are, but how you make them feel, and especially how you make them feel about themselves. I actually know a whole lot about this kind of stuff because of all the sales classes I had to take to learn how to just have a conversation. Which, in the end, like I said, I just needed to understand that they're not paying attention. But to actually be well, to be able to communicate on the level that I'm able to now compared to like just being someone that just was quiet all the time. I wound up taking a lot of sales classes, and in fact, when I went to Job Corps, I wound up majoring in retail sales, and they had us. That was odd. Job Corps had made me do a whole packet and learning course of all the neuro linguistics programming stuff. But these are the things that comes down to, right? And if you're wanting to intimidate someone, you don't come up to them with fear, though. You come up to them with both confidence and anger. You come up to them with the assumption that they are the one that is in danger because of your anger. They're the one that needs to respond, right? And you need to make them feel that just an assumption that you are the one in the dominant position. But anyways, the other thing is, like I said, people respond not to who you are, but how you make them feel. And more importantly, how you make them feel about themselves. So if you are in a situation where you're trying to talk somebody down from a bad trip or some type of fear moment, you want to put that calm confidence, and you want to make them figure out ways to make them feel better about themselves and about their situation. And sometimes you're calming someone down that's from bereavement. He's going to talk about that a bit here, but like if someone is having trouble with processing something, or even if it is from a bad trip or any of that, a big part of this is actually just listening in the right way. That's what he's called emotional engineering, and all this he's talking about. I guess that's what I'm really building up to here is more important in the priestcraft rather than making people be able to feel a certain way. More important is being able to listen in a way that doesn't make the person feel judged, in a way that doesn't make the person feel like you are citing things about them and changing your opinion on them from what they say. And that is the key to being a good listener. And that is the thing that a priest needs to do. That's why, well, what a priest ought to be, And so a lot of times you have these confessionals and they're using a totally different thing there. But still, what it is being a good listener. That's the bit of priestcraft there, not emotional engineering. Meaning, creating meaning in life. How do we escape the existential crisis? Well, this one, the answer was already on the first bit where we was talking about shamanism. It is in that story, that motion of poetry. Holding space, yes, this is true. That's a good word for it, Romstead. And I actually like the term holding space. But when you're trying to cop someone down, you're doing more than holding space. But if you're dealing with the guilt and the processing, or guilt, sadness, whatever, if you're dealing with someone's needing to process, then absolutely. Holding space is a perfect concept for what that term is. And I mean, even that idea, though, of holding space, where that term comes from, that goes all the way back to shamanism, even. Because that's one of the things that I was originally taught to do. And actually, I'm realizing I haven't done in a long time. Is That's part of the reason for the cult spirits. You have the four spirits that you've created, essentially like your four kind of like familiars that you put around you to open up the circle. I haven't done that forever. Why have I left that out of my routine? I'm going to we're going to be revisiting that. I'm going to be revisiting that and updating. Realizing I left out some I've been leaving out some fairly important bits. It just kind of got left by on the wayside. But anyways, meaning is in that story of the moment. And we each write our own story. So, in a way, what I'm saying here is absurdity. The answer to nihilism is absurdity. But absurdity is not absurd. That is the natural order of reality. That is the natural way of how things exist. They give it this term of absurdity because they think it is absurd to put meaning and value in your life from your own perspective. But that's the primal reality. That's the driving force behind all of existence, is to live your life as the art form of you. I find that re-talking someone down from a bad trip, often changing the ambient vibe, is more effective than words. Yes, this is very true. Oh, rather than talking someone down from a bad trip, often changing the ambient vibe is more effective than words. Lighting and music are the easiest to change quickly. Indeed. Yes, that's true. So if it is something that is like actually a bad trip, sometimes just push and skip on the CD player. Well, just dated myself there, didn't I? But simply going to the next song, changing the lighting often will just totally change it, especially if you're having trouble with yourself. So, I think we'll use that as the segue actually. So, how do we control our own emotions? This is a bit more complicated, but there are ways to do that. And the first one is meditation, you know, learning to make yourself calm. learning to just chill by relaxation. And this can be learned with meditation, but really, more precisely, this is a great thing to learn with self hypnosis. Um, you can do it with just the meditations that they give you that for that about feeling relaxed, and go over the different parts of your body. Tell yourself that your muscles are feeling loose and soft, and that your heartbeat slowing down just a bit. Your breathing is evening out, slowing down. And just let yourself do that. Or you can use the pendulum self hypnosis. I don't have a pendulum available. Oh, I got this. And just in the same way, hold it out there, tell it to spin, and your subconscious will make it spin. And then once you have control of your subconscious, tell yourself that you are becoming calm and relaxed. Calm, relax. And you can trance out into the pendulum with that by doing exactly that. And this is a way to achieve calm. Now, once we have achieved that point of it, we can but projecting one's own energy in a soothing way can be good too. Indeed, especially if this is someone that feels comfortable with your touch. Touch can be very calming. But with the self, this is a good start. And once you have learned how to get that point, hit that point of feeling that calm and relax, the trick is to remember how that moment feels. Intentionally get there and learn how it feels. Remember the flow of it and just go into it, right? And basically, you're creating a trigger. You can get there through meditation or the self hypnosis with either method. But once you get there, you can even tell yourself to imagine a sigil. That's what I usually do is a sigil that's connected to these things, but you can create anything, something that you can visualize that represents that state of being, that calm. And then in the future, visualizing that sigil bring you back into that state. The more often you do it, the better it's going to work. It isn't going to like work like snapping your fingers the first time. Might you do really good at self hypnosis, self hypnotizing yourself, but repetition, law of repetition. Every time a cycle is repeated, the every time a cycle is repeated, the momentum. Every time a pattern is repeated, the momentum of its cycle increases. You think I'd be able to remember these things, but you know, over time, we can get the calm. Now, this can be used in other ways. As for adding meaning to life, lately for me, trying to add beauty to everywhere I go brings me meaning. But I keep finding people taking advantage of my beauty for their own agenda at my expense. Well, that last bit kind of sucks. But that is exactly what I'm talking about creating beauty in the world. Sometimes we're creating that beauty just for its own sake. And it is hard to see people take that beauty and besmirch it, you know, to sully it. But that doesn't mean not to create more beauty, because that is what gives us meaning. That is what gives us purpose. Create the things that we see as beautiful. Perhaps find ways to not allow that people to taint that beauty. I don't know. That I certainly can't tell you how to do the meaning of your life in the finer sense, but I understand how you feel. I get that. It makes me think of I can never remember the name of the short story or who wrote it, but there's a short story about a man that's hired to find an artist, and he's looking all over for the artist. And he tracks him down to the ocean, and when he finally finds him, he's drawing in the sand as the tide is coming in these huge, beautiful portraits. And he's like, "What are you?" And the detective's like, "What are you doing? You know, this is just going to be gone." He's like, "Well, that's the point. If I create it here in the sand, it's just for me. I don't have to share it with anyone." But there's also the beauty and the temporary nature of that, and that's one of the things I wanted to say about the Gnosticism. You know, it seemed like seemed like there was a like well, Peter Carroll said it outright that they do not place any value in the material world because it is temporary. But that makes no sense to me, right? That's the whole structure of why nihilism is answered by something they call absurdity, because supposedly something being temporary makes it meaningless. And I don't see that. The value, the meaning is in the moment. It is in the expression, the feeling. It is in what we get from perceiving that moment. And even to me, in a literal sense, because it is about entertaining the audience. This is what gets us this is what gets us more connected to our fullest self. This is what gives more momentum to our magic. This is what adds to the story of us. And the more weaving there is to our story, to our myth, the more we become, the more momentum we have to our magic. Indeed, Max. Indeed. But that is good. Use the destruction that people hand me to create more beautiful art. Yes, this is, you know, um, one of my exes had a very traumatic childhood, but she had this work of art she had made where she took a beautiful doll's face and broke it and then placed it back together on the canvas and kind of painted it all back into place, held together. And it's one of the most beautiful works I've ever seen. In her case, I kind of saw it as her self portrait, but she created some beauty while she was here amongst the destruction. Oh, hey, March of Time. Glad to see you're here. Is there a herbal mixture for baths in order to remove negative energy? Um, well, just a salt bath will help. There are certainly things you can add if you're trying to simply do a cleanse. Um, a little bit of citrus helps very well, in my opinion. You want to be mindful of citrus because it's got the citric acid in there. Do not use cinnamon, or if you do, use very small amounts because it's got cinnamon oil in there and that will cause some issues. Um, if you have access, a bit of sweetgrass in the bath is very useful. If you were buying sweetgrass, you want to make sure you buy it in a form that was braided, because if whoever picked it didn't braid it and sing to it, then it's not what it is. Oh, yeah, it's not gotten its full potency. It hasn't been told what it's supposed to do. And so it hasn't been given its magic, right? That's another bit about that, creating the story, creating the mythology. I was taught very much that when you were gathering herbs for a spell or for a thing to cure somebody or anything like that, when you were gathering plants, you tell the plant what it's for, right? You can do this again when you're putting it into the power bundle or whatever spell, whatever gid you're creating, as my great grandfather would call anything of that nature. He called it gid, which I think has to do with with the word gitchy. I don't actually I don't actually know the language. I just know the words I was taught. But anyways, so these there's a story there, but we're actually no. This is a good way to do that. To talk about that, the power bundles come back into play when we're talking about controlling our own emotions and this creating of beauty. 'Cause like I said, we have the pouches that we sometimes wear that we keep things we want to keep close to our heart, things that have meaning to us in the pouch. And this is where we keep a small piece of that beauty, of that creation, of that self-expression within the pouch. And these are ones that we don't ever share with anyone else, right? But also getting back into the controlling your emotions. The things that you put in the pouch are things that made you feel certain emotions or something that was there when you felt those emotions. Like you can even just pick up a rock from a beautiful moment, put that in the pouch because then that rock is connected to that moment. So when you want to feel that moment again, you can open up the pouch and bring out that stone. And that's part of the purpose of the secrecy is because if people just see your bag is full of rocks that they don't know what they mean, it devalues them, right? So that's part of the reason that secrecy is there. Because to other people, these are just stones. To you, it might just be a rock you picked up the day that you met someone of extreme importance to you, that like, your future partner. And each thing in there that you open up in the pouch, like I said, to other people it's just a stone, but each one is connected to an emotion. And you can get to those emotions through those moments. Sage, you have a mixture of sage, thyme, oregano, rosemary, and cinnamon for the bath. Um, I would be careful with the cinnamon. Like I said, I did say don't use cinnamon. I have used it. I do sometimes use it myself, which is why it even came to mind. But you have to be careful because of the cinnamon oil. I don't know if you're aware that was in there, but too much cinnamon oil in the bath will cause a chemical burn. Um, or a bottle that a candle fell into. Yeah. Honestly, a lot of times with the herbal bath, I just get what is near that is connected to what I want to do if I'm doing it for a magical standpoint. Because salt alone is enough to do the cleansing part. A salt bath will do the trick, right? You can add any of those things that you want. Those are all helpful. The cinnamon, that's more of a fire element in a different way. Like you can certainly burn away impurities with it though. You put eugenol, clove oil in the mixture? All right. Um, as you will. I certainly have eugenol. If you ever have a toothache, nothing better than eugenol on a toothache. Stings like crazy for a minute, but then it kills the nerve. I've never put eugenol in my bath water though. It's an interesting idea. Even chewing on a bit of clove, if you can stand it on your toothache, will help. So yeah, the emotional control, like it can be useful to be able to get oneself to calm down, especially if you just have a sigil associated or a picture in your mind that you can picture that brings you back to calm. But it's not a bad. It's not a fix all. It's just a stopgap measure to try and get yourself to calm down. Um, I mean, like I do it quite often. Like, all right, just calm down. But that's one of the negative aspects of my particular neurodivergence. I'll get real jumpy and anxious when I'm trying to do stuff and start thinking I need to do it at 100 miles per hour. You know, and I actually have a maxim that I tell myself at these points. I'm like, you don't have time to hurry. I use that maxim when I am trying to get somewhere quickly because hurrying is an extra thing, right? So that maxim gets me to calm down, gets me to return to focus. And that's not exactly the same as emotional control, but I mean, some of that, I don't know what he's talking about there. You know, you don't get, no matter how much we work at it, we're never going to have full emotional control of ourselves. Associate purification with antimicrobial stuff. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Before I've actually put silver in the water, just like literally like, oh, what was it? It was a silver platter. Or no, it was smaller than that. But as I put silver in the water will help. It's another thing I've done when I'm trying to do purification. But a lot of times, what I will do is mostly just a saltwater bath, and then when I get out, use the sweetgrass as incense and use that as the second part of the purification. If you really want to do a cleanse, you could do an egg cleanse before that, which is where you take the egg and roll it around you with the intent of it pulling out any negative energies, any links, parasites that you don't want connected to you. Put that into the egg. Some people like to then break the egg and look in the water and see what there is, but I don't think you should break the egg in your own. I don't think the egg should be broken in your presence. That that seems counterproductive to me. Now the stuff's gotten back out. I suppose if you get it right into the water, it's pulled into the water. You know, that is a traditional thing. I certainly don't mean to knock it, but I myself, I just get rid of the egg and then do the purification and then take the bath and then do the incense purification afterwards if I'm really trying to get myself cleansed for like a ritual or something like that. I'll probably do a shave, you know, and then you can. Okay. Anyways, so oh, that's right. Had we gotten past the emotional bit? We were talking about meaning. Yeah, and like I said, these what I was told to call a wampum pouch is something where you hold the value, and these help hold your astral form as well, and they help hold meaning to you and keep a point of milestones within your story so that you keep your story clear in memory of what it is that you have been doing in your existence. Intercession. That's just magic in general, right? I'm not sure what he was getting at here, except for just pointing out that religion is bad at intercession. And for the most part, that's true. Like Mormonism in particular, I hardly ever see it work. I've seen a lot of people pray for Mormonism. A lot of people will pray for this or that in Mormonism, tell me they're praying for this or that are Mormon. None of that ever happened. Now, my grandma, when she was Mormon and when she wasn't, that lady prayed about you, it was going to happen. You know, that was why that whole thing where we had that discussion about witchcraft. She was like, every night I pray for you to become Mormon. You know, she said, well, if I'm going to tell the story again, I should do it from the beginning. My grandma, who I got along with very well her entire life, up until her death, she loved me very much. I loved her very much. She one day tells me, oh, Art, I love you so much. Every day I pray that you'll become Mormon. And I said, oh, Grandma, I love you so much. From this day forward, I'm going to start casting spells to make you a witch. And she was like, but. And I was like, well, Grandma, it's the same thing. So then we agreed not to cast spells on each other and not to talk about religion in that way. We still talked about religion sometimes because it's interesting to talk about. Okay. And that's religion that's my grandma on my mother's side. There's a lot of Mormon stock on my mom's side. My genetic makeup. Okay, so yeah, intercession and that's just spellcraft, right? I guess I'm mostly just trying to point out that religion isn't very good at that, though sometimes it can be. Depends on who's doing the praying, which is pretty much what he says here, and that's true of all religions. It depends on who's doing the praying, what's being prayed about. I did see a little bit of an interesting deal with the Mormons praying for rain a while back, in that, well, there's even less rain this year, but for the one year all along the Wasatch Front, there was more rain than there was in the rest of the state. So maybe they did manage to do a little bit of a magic working there for the weather, which is one of the easiest things to do, especially in a group working. But it made the rest of the state even drier, and made that's so they affected that whole Colorado River system and messed up a bunch of stuff if it is the case. So irresponsible use of weather magic when they do have intercession. And then death is the next part. We've talked quite a bit about that in some of the lives, and that what he's talking about here, in that giving someone an idea of what to understand after death. Maybe this is where he said the line. The line that he says somewhere in all of this, he says, necromancy is a dying art form, which I thought was hilarious. Especially since he doesn't say it like to be funny. He's just saying that it's not as common as it used to be. Hey, Black Unigriffin, glad to see you. You just missed the line that I thought was so funny. Does mediumship count as necromancy? That is where the term necromancy really comes from, is the idea of speaking to the dead. Yes, the line that he says in here that I thought was so funny is he said that necromancy is a dying art form. And I can't remember I couldn't remember where he said it, so I decided to finally just say it. But yeah, that's true. I found that I found that quite entertaining. But it also is less people are practicing necromancy these days than there used to be. I suppose that's true. Um, what was yeah, so we were on the bit about death. I've talked quite a bit about how to prepare for death. I think we've talked about it on some of the lives even. And the best thing is to create a dream platform, create a space that you go during your dreams so that you know where to go, you know where to be after you pass. The more you do astral projection, the more you have lucid dreams, the more you have a cohesive concept of reality outside of your body in this form, the more this form is going to be able to pass from your body and into the afterlife. And the more if you have somewhere created as to where to go, then you're not going to be reliant on any god or anything like that to have somewhere to crash. You'll have your own space. You won't need to rent. But really, the astral is full of potential to create space. So I'm gonna do a live real soon, actually, on what they're gonna. We'll talk about lucid dreaming and dream platforms a bit more, because I feel like this is a good way to go about the process. That way, if there's any questions, people can ask me. You know, if I'm not being clear. Sometimes on the videos, I worry that I'm not being clear enough. But anyways, yeah. And we also have the idea of the S1 sigil that I've talked about, and that is some place that we can go at that moment of death if we're not prepared with these other things that we've created, perhaps in conjunction with the S1 sigil. What we really need to know is at the moment of death, as you're passing, if you visualize the S1 sigil, you will be pulled to its location. From there, you get calm. You can go to any location from there, and no harm can be done to you. So there is something to be said for that. Certainly something that I have put some work into. Oh, this is the one. Oh, here's what he says. Necromancy is something of a dying art these days, largely because it has been widely abused by those who are merely telepathic with the living and or who want their money. But anyways, back to the question. Mediumship count as necromancy. If the person is an actual medium, absolutely. That's where the concept comes from, is divining from the dead. So anytime you're speaking with the dead, that's the what necromancy actually means. We often think of the word necromancy though as working spellcraft with the dead, and specifically with necro working with dead skulls. I feel like there's a word there that I suddenly can't remember. Necrotic tissue. Necrotic tissue, I think, implies like rotting. So maybe not. But either way, working with skulls and stuff like that is what we tend to think of with necromancy, though. Yeah. But yeah, death is something that we definitely prepare for as sorcerers, and a lot of this is talking about if you want to perform priestcraft. Like, I don't really feel like priestcraft in and of itself is necessary for a sorcerer to have. Can be useful, especially if you're going to be doing group workings. or even, if you're going to be doing readings for people, or if you're going to be kind of taking this role amongst your friends. And he talks about after that about the social structure. Indeed. In ancient Greece, necromancers were basically what we'd call a psychic medium today. They'd contact the shade or umbrage of the dead person. Yes, this is exactly correct. That's also where I got where the word umbra comes from, I believe, which I was talking about when I was talking about shadow magic. Which, anyways, makes me wonder about some connections there that I haven't thought about for a while. But that is very off topic and worthy of its own discussion another time. So let's see. Social structure. He talks about the social structure and hierarchy. Now, he did good there and talked about he shouldn't make hierarchy and how if you create a cult, there are going to be problems. He didn't mention about how anytime you create a hierarchical social structure, the higher you go up that social structure, the farther you are removed from reality. Because the people below you are only going to tell you what they would tell someone at your level. They're going to treat you a certain way that is not the full reality of what they're thinking and what they're believing. This is why you don't want to become a cult leader because you're gonna lose connection with the actual reality. There's other things too. These people are going to become dependent on you. You're going to become dependent on them. You won't be. It's a bad scene. That's why I've never. That's why I've never started a cult because I know it's a bad thing. And once you lose that connection to reality, we're very vulnerable to ego inflation, power sap, and that's why most of these cults, once they get going, they can't even affect the weather. The Mormons, I guess, maybe did get a little bit of rain that year that they prayed for it, but that's part of the reason that large religions lose that power of prayer, and the same reason that cults do is because they lose touch with the actual base reality. You need to maintain that connection. You need to be able to connect with reality in order to be able to affect it. So once you have people that are not telling you the reality anymore around you, treating you a certain way in a social structure, you become insulated, become held out from reality. Yeah, I do think there is a connection there between shadow and spirit. And I mean, I've talked about it before, but never in directly those words. And it's funny that that would be a little catching point for my understanding of the concepts. Like I've even worked with shadow people in the past, and they're not like the shadow people that you see according to things. Those aren't the dead, but there's definitely a connection to like how their forms are created and how they are and what a ghost is, right? There's a similarity there. And sometimes when you see a ghost, you do see it as a black silhouette, and that's why, because of the similarity between the beings. And even why sometimes trying to see a ghost too closely will make it harder to see or harder for it to exist. Direct perception can harm a ghost's form. Indeed, a phantom is actually the type of form that I essentially aiming for at the end of this life. Like when I pass from this life, I intend to have a type of etheric form on the edge of the material that I can reconnect to if I decide to continue on with what I call surviving death. I have a whole video on the idea of surviving death and how I intend to go about essentially becoming a ghost or a wraith. Well, I guess wraith was the term I used after this life, but wraiths and phantoms are, yeah, that was hard to say. Wraiths and phantoms are fairly closely connected beings. Anyways, it is now time for my first intermission. Be right back. Hey, what do you know? Without the beer, I made it up. Not much longer, actually, than I usually make it. Okay. So, um, yeah, we was talking about the social hierarchy stuff, social structure. You certainly don't want to have a hierarchy. Commercialism or a police raid was the last bit there. And that's really kind of what I was just continues on what I was just talking about, and him pointing out that it can end in a police raid. You don't want to get Waco'd, and that's how you wind up there. Is that separation from reality? They seem to really believe that they was going to have this moment where they would be able to defeat the police department because God was going to come be on their side or something, you know, and that's how you get there. And you just get stranger and stranger to the local populace if you don't become, well, if you're going to have an organization, one of the things that's important to be I'm not necessarily even advocating for that, but if you're going to have something like that, either it is something that is has no hierarchy and is kept secret, or it has a democratically elected control and a PR representation. If you're going to have people, if people are going to know about it at all, you need to have some relation with PR, public relations, and actually take these things into account. Um, anyways, I'm not necessarily advocating for any of that, at any rate, But that's this whole bit here. He's kind of trying to talk about how to turn chaos magic into a religion. Essentially, is what I'm seeing there. And he talked about in the beginning of it how it's bad when magic becomes religion. So I think the whole bit might be a bit counterproductive. So, like I said, we was going to talk about all that stuff, and then now we're going to circle back around to the shamanism. And we're only an hour and 45 minutes into the live. So, you missed and we went through all of the first bit of it pretty quickly, but we're coming back around to the shamanism. Like you missed or you caught most of the priestcraft discussion, but we're gonna come back to the shamanism, and we'll talk a little bit more about Gnosticism, maybe depending on if if Max has anything interesting to say about it, because it's not a paradigm that I know a lot about. I'm not really one to speak a whole lot on Gnosticism. Okay, so like I said, yeah, fair enough. So yeah, the shamanism, one of the things that is often left out or not properly understood is that it is all about the story. That is the most cohesive weaving of the whole thing. It's about the mystery and right. It's about the plot. It's about the weaving of a tapestry that a web. This is one of the things that he forgot to mention at all in there, and one of the things that connects almost all of these different shamanic traditions together is the idea of the weaving of a web of story, mythology, of metaphor becoming life, and life mimicking metaphors, right? And oh yeah, Greece had all kinds of different ideas on the afterlife. I mean, you have your classic one, which was that you'd wind up in Hades. Is that right? Because I was getting my Roman and my Greek mixed up. You have your classic one, but Greeks had all kinds of different little cults and stuff at the same time. So there were definitely disagreements. Fair enough, Max. Perhaps you can do something on your channel with it when you're more prepared. I certainly didn't mean to just put you on the spot. um, so yeah, that is one of the most valuable parts to understand, and that is one of the things that is in all the primal traditions, what they call shamanism, all these different primal traditions that are connected to the earth and the heart and deep matter of things as they can be, is this idea of a weaving of metaphor, myth, and reality being connected. And that can't be the importance of that can be understated. This is where the law of aesthetics comes from. I talk about the law of aesthetics and how everything has this flow of synchronicity to it, and how this explains the weaving of the pattern. This is what I'm talking about. This is the primal understanding that led to the creation of the law of aesthetics. There's that weaving. And then another thing that I wanted to talk about, and we covered already a bit, is what we call animism. And that's actually part of this same thing, the beginning bit there. And one of the things I want to stress with the way people misunderstand things is that there is spirit and then there's spirits. And spirit is just that, the outer edge of that weaving as it moves around and how you flow within the spirit. And then there's the spirits that you might upset if you do this or that, or that you can call upon for certain things. And these are different things. Spirit is almost like in the spirit of things, right? You got to be in, like, that seems like I'm doing a play on words, and I suppose I am. But that kind of spirit, you need to be into the spirit of things. You need to work within the weave of the story that is in front of you. Um, like I said, that can take the place even of superstition. Like I have several cousins that will not take food with them when they are hunting, because if you have food on you, then you must not need food that bad, and that's going to take away your luck when you're hunting. So, in order to get luck, you want to go within the spirit of things. You want to have this. You want to walk within the story you were weaving, and that's another part that is often left out. Basically, it's kind of like living in the fairy tale. Okay, so um, in that, like I said, also when we say the rocks can hear things, what we mean is that everything has a memory. It doesn't really have a perception, but places have memory, and some places have a bit of a perception. Even depends on the place. I'm not saying that no places have perception. There are places that are self-aware. There are certainly buildings that are self-aware, and but this is one of the things that people misunderstand with most forms of this animism, this shamanistic paradigm, is we don't think all the rocks are alive. We believe that there is a memory and an energy and a spirit that is in all things. Spirit is in all things. It is the flow of energy, right? It is what it is the weird. It is the energy in E equals MC squared. Yes, the many places that are self-aware. Um, can be really interesting to be in a house that is aware of itself. And I know quite a few people that have purposely awoken their houses in this way and use that as well, this is a play on words, I suppose, but a house spirit. But there isn't a distance in the realms, not a physical distance. They're overlapping, and they're all right on top of each other here. But we are in only aware of certain aspects, and only those that we are perceiving affect us. Well, there isn't, like I said, there isn't distances between the realms because distance is a part of matter. Distance is a part of the material realm. All the other ones, there is no actual distance. They're here. They've always been there. But we're only affected with those aspects that we perceive. The rest simply pass right through us without having an interaction because we are not on a frequency that is perceiving or interacting with that part of the realm. Or it is, except for in the how it affects those that we do perceive, because they're still there in the background behind what is going on. If you're talking about the different levels of reality, I don't know, I've gotten a little lost with what you were saying. Anyways, um, so with animism, those are some of the things that are the misconceptions, but everything has a spirit. Everything has spirit, but then there are also spirits, right? But there's a spirit of many different things. For example, every deer has a spirit, has a soul, has its own existence. But if you are hunting a deer, you when you petition the deer spirit, you are not like actually asking all the like sending out like a group chat to message to all the deer in the area and asking that one be given to you. You are speaking with a larger metaphor, right? You are speaking with the spirit of deer. There's a like the collective consciousness given form, right? The collective consciousness of all the deer that exist, just like there's a collective consciousness of all the humans in the world. And from an outside perspective, you can interact with this as a spirit. There's a spirit of man, even, or humans, whatever you want to call it, that can be interacted with. But us being inside of it, it gets a little weird. It's not quite the same as when you were interacting with um, the spirit of deer in general. In Philadelphia at the Art Museum, but near the Scully River, there's pavilion gazebos. There used to be this arch, and when you passed inside it was like passing through a gate. And there was an earth dragon formation. I used to go in there with my friends, and most of them could feel her there. Oh, it got chopped up. That's too bad. I mean, I think in most cultures there's a concept of spirits within objects. It got chopped up the year you graduated. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely places that have that feel, and that's something that's even talked about in shamanism, the sacred spots. There are areas where the earth is more aware, where there's more magic. There are places that are connected to the mythology where the metaphors are closer to matching the material plane. And yeah, these spirits of a place become aware, some of them, to very interesting degrees, but there's always that residual feeling, and each forest has a collective consciousness of its own, and so does every desert. These are things that can be reasoned with. These are things that can be worked with through spellcraft. These are things that can be become learned to become understood, and that's another part of animism that they're not people don't talk about a lot is learning to understand the spirit of an individual forest or desert. Each one has its way, and we can learn to work with these spirits and make requests for, but also to help with these the forest and the desert and learn the ways that interact with us. So I feel like the Mojave Desert, there's a reason all deserts have names, but the Mojave Desert is a very particular place, and it has a very particular personality, which if you do not respect, it will kill you. There are people that have died less than 15 minutes from their car because of how hot it can be there. It's one of the places that the metaphor matches the material plane in some ways over that entire desert. But it's a place that must be absolutely respected. Okay, so let's see. What else do I want to make sure that I've covered here? We didn't cover the first time, maybe. Um, I have another story that I'm going to tell about this and an understanding because I keep talking about how this shamanism is a primal thing. It does not need to be primitive. If you look at you mentioned Japan just a moment ago and the Shinto religion. The Shinto religion in a lot of ways has a lot of these same ideas. It's shamanism taken all the way to the Japanese culture, to that high culture, if you want. I couldn't think of a better word than high civilization, but it still has that shamanistic understanding. So it's primal. It does not need to be primitive, right? And it's still something that you should learn. So I got a story. When I was a boy, my uncle, and this happened to me with two different uncles. One was my dad's uncle, one was my dad's brother, and the other, my mother, her grand or my mother's dad's cousin, had just happened to marry an Ojibwe woman. Now that's how you know my mom's side is Mormon because I know who my grandpa's cousin was and who his kid was. In fact, he wound up living with my mom for a while when they were kids, so that's why he's uncle. But he was Ojibwe as well, and they both did this same thing to me. And what happened was my uncle Rick. I'll tell his version because it happened first, and I tell you how silly I am that I fell for this twice in the same summer. Um, he tells me he's going to show me how an Ojibwe lights a fire. So he gets all these sticks, and he gets them about that big around, and they're about that long, and he puts them and he gets the fuzzy, furry stuff under there that's all light and fluffy, and he's all careful about how he puts it together and makes like a little cross section so all the sticks are laying on top of each other and makes it all perfect. And I get down there close, watching, staring at the little bundle of sticks, waiting to see Uncle Rick show me how an Indian lights a fire. And so I'm starting to watch that. All of a sudden, I hear this splush. something wet hits the stones and then woof, and it bursts into flames. He threw gasoline on it, lit it on fire. And as much as it's like, yeah, he's just messing with me in some ways, this is funny. I mean, my dad and him both laugh their asses off. There's an understanding in that. There's an important piece of the puzzle in understanding that we continue forward. Later on, when I had one of my vision quests that I'm allowed to talk about, the one when I turned 14 and I was taken back home to Michigan, back to, like what we kind of consider like home country, homeland, whatever you want to call it. Um, that's where that's where my ancestors from that line come from. Um, I was taken there, and like my dad takes me out in the woods and leaves me there and tells me to not come back until something happens. So I'm out there looking around, and I see this old tree that's dead. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I might as well gather some firewood. And I walk over and I bust a branch off the tree, and the whole tree falls down into a perfect little thing of firewood. Like, it shouldn't have done that. I was like, okay, well, that's the thing then. That's something weird. Something weird happened. So I gather the firewood and I take it back. And they said that the thing that I was learning here, the metaphor that was given to me by this tree turning itself into firewood for me. Just like I went to break a branch and the whole little tree just broke down into a pile of firewood. I just had to pick it up in one go on my arms and carry it back. Was that I was to be that I belonged to the future, not the past. That what was old and broken, and I needed to take what I could from it and carry forward into the future, right? And that's the same lesson almost. It's the same thing being told to me again, that I'm not, the intention isn't for the things that I know to be in a museum. That is to be take what works, takes what take what is possible and carry it into the future. And so that's what I have done. But that's part of my story. And part of the reason I'm telling that is about that right there, about how the metaphor is given the reality, right? That's how omens work even. Is an omen will often be a metaphor for what it is trying to tell you. Like when you get a real omen, there's often that feeling, like what I was talking about earlier with the animal spirits, which we'll get into that in a moment. And because we just talked a little bit about the spirit of animals, but I want to talk some more about the animal spirit stuff. I realized I left a lot of that off. So, anyways, the metaphor actually comes up to match the material plane in these moments. It was literally a metaphor for what was going to happen, or what I needed to learn from this moment. Okay, so spirit animals. Now, I mentioned before that sometimes people are often concerned with cultural appropriation and the idea of spirit animals. Well, my great grandfather very much believed that everyone had a spirit animal. Like I said, there are many different ways to find out what your spirit animal is. Um, this can be done simply through meditation, but ideally it should be through a moment of connection with the animal, a moment of understanding. But sometimes your spirit animal is just obvious and people can see it in you. The part of the reason I know for sure that my great grandfather believed everyone had a spirit animal was because he believed this was a way to get advantage over people, especially white people, because they didn't know their own spirit animal. Once you understood someone's spirit animal, you could work with them in relation to that and know how to deal with this person. In fact, the thumbnail for the live is a picture of, let's see, I'm actually gonna, let me get one here that's, okay, let me change the view. So the thumbnail for the live is a picture of my great grandfather with George Romney. They're both smoking cigarettes. I'm gonna go ahead and just share this one over for just a moment. Let's see, how do I do that again? Oh, it won't let me share that screen. Window. There we are. Let me share. Oh, just a moment. I okay. I want to make sure there wasn't anything too ridiculous. I was gonna exit. Yeah. No spoilers or anything. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and share this screen for a moment. That there, that is my great grandfather Lemmy Stevens, also known as Netemup, and George Romney, who was the governor of Michigan at the time, smoking cigarettes together. I've done a video on this, but my grandpa Stevens very much believed that he knew George Romney's spirit animal. And by knowing George Romney's spirit animal, not only, let me get over here so I can see what you guys are saying. By knowing George Romney's spirit animal, not only did he believe that gave him advantage in how they worked out their agreements between him and between the state and the tribe, but he also used this as a way to create a link to George Romney so that he could cast on him later by bringing a totem of that spirit animal when he was when he was speaking with George Romney, maybe this time here even. I don't know when he did it, like when he made the connection, but I do know that it was made, and that's how it was made because I was told the story about how he brought the figurine and kept it in his pouch and then reached in and touched it while he was speaking with George Romney. In fact, probably the moment they got the tobacco going on right here, be a great time for that to happen. Let's see, I'm gonna go back over there. There we go. That's what we're supposed to be on. Okay. Okay. That's enough of that. So, um, spirit animals. Like I said, everybody has one, but we don't have just your spirit animal. There is also your, like I said, your mother spirit. You can also have a father spirit, warrior spirit. There are all these different spirits that become connected to you, and even ones that you can assume their role in yourself. And yeah, it's far from cultural appropriation to find out what your animal spirit is. You know, if you're running around saying, "Oh, this latte is my animal spirit," and different stuff like that, like indeed, and your animal spirit is very fluid and shape shifting. Like I said, there are different aspects to that. What I mean by the fact that, like, there's a difference here, right? My spirit is perhaps a weasel, but also maybe that the thing that I saw on my actual quest, right? Because I had that connection with the weasel, but on my actual quest, I saw a thing I mean, I saw Manitou, not like it's you Manitou. I guess I can say that I saw a mystery. It's not even that I keep secret, because how the hell would I explain to you what I saw? I saw mystery. And that's not telling you anything, but it's telling you everything. It's telling you the whole thing. But I'm keeping the secrecy while saying it, so that counts as keeping the secrecy, right? So there's that, and I suppose that makes sense, right? Being what I am, according to, like, that guy that I just showed you in the picture. That's what he told my dad when long before I was born. Is your firstborn child will be the next Manitou. So here I am. I don't do negotiations with governors for the tribe or anything like that. In fact, I mean, I grew up in Utah. I didn't grow up on a reservation or anything like that. Um, but neither did my grandma, because my great grandfather kept everyone off the reservation so that they wouldn't go to the residential schools that he had to escape when he was a kid. Like, they took him, they came and got him when he was like 4 years old and took him to one of them residential schools. He escaped. I don't know exactly how he made it home, but he made it back all the way home, and then I suppose ran away every time they tried to get him, because they do tend to come back and get those kids. So he never wound up back at the school after that. But once he got married and started having his own kids, he didn't go back on the reservation until after they were all grown. So my grandmother, or my nanny as I called her, she grew up in the summer along the Flint River in various different buildings that he would make. Like, she said that she called the tar paper shack, and in the winter they'd go sleep in people's snowbird cabins, like people that only came for the summer, and then when the winter came, they'd all leave. They'd actually just go and live in one of those. My my great grandfather, his wife, and my nanny and her 12 brothers and sisters. And they just stay in there all winter, because technically the treaty said if anything was abandoned, they could have it. Like, well, they abandoned it for the winter. So that's where he'd go live all winter. And then they'd leave before the people got there in the spring and go live along the Flint River. Couldn't live along the Flint River these days, though. That's, that was, it's famously toxic these days. I was wondering if one could change their soul, but what is exactly the source that keeps changing the soul back into the physical form? You can absolutely change your form. You can learn to create whatever self you want over time. What creates the form of the self? Will. My main totem is a kind of dragon, but he can be other things like the wind and various other animals. Very specific ones have big meanings to me. Awesome. What does my spirit animal as a golden snake mean? That depends on what you mean by that. That's not something I can just, like, I would have to be with you and in your presence, and to be able to give you any kind of real honest opinion on something like that. I was wondering if one could change their soul. Is exactly this? There's keeps changing the soul back to the physical form. Like I said, we can change and alter these things. One spirit animal can even change over time. I was wondering. Oh, I started reading a second time. As I take partial forms in my meditations and dreams. Yes, this is the soul shifting that we were talking about. I have quite a few alters who see themselves in specific animals. Indeed, I would imagine where you have the different personalities in the body that they're not all going to have the same spirit animal, you know. But the spirit animal is part of just kind of an animal that has the same frequency of mind as you. Um, it's a connection, but it's like I said, it can change over time. Just like in the shamanic tradition, almost every culture that follows a shamanic tradition, one's name can change over time. And this is a connection to that. I mean, even my name, Art, is a connection to trying to put me into a type of story, placing me into a certain metaphor. That's why my dad named me Art. That's the way names are supposed to work in that culture, is that your name is more like a title. It says something about you. It places you in a specific place in the plot of the story and the mythology and metaphor that is going on. And this is why often one would take a name. We aren't just always given our names. So that's one of the beautiful things about some of the other processes going on these days. Is it's finally giving people a chance to take a name again, to claim their own name. I mean, I'm gonna stick with Art. I have no desire to claim a different name. Tal, I suppose I did. I have two names now because I maybe a lot of you think of me as Sorcerer Tal, and I think of myself as Sorcerer Tal as well. So I've taken a second name, which is also a name that I've had in past lives. I mean, I've been Tal longer than I've been Art. So yeah, for sure. 'Cause I was far older than I am now when I died in that life. Cool. It seems that cats seem to be a common connection with people. And I'm not trying. That is not me knocking that in any way. I think what I'm bringing it up for is that I think the commonality, the familiarity of being around cats a lot affects people enough that we have more understanding of cats and therefore a higher likelihood to feel that bond and connection that comes with the animal spirit connection. But there are also spirits that, animals that we have connections to outside of that. Like I was talking about my mother's spirit being the grouse. And for some reason, my nemesis seems to be the female moose. I don't know what that's about. And it's better than it used to be, but for a long time there, man, it seemed like I couldn't go too far into the woods without freaking cat chasing me. And see, I have a huge connection to dogs. Cats are awesome. I honestly, people ask me, do I like cats? My answer is, let me meet the cat. Because they're way too variable. I mean, it's pretty rare for me to meet a cat I don't like. Way more uncommon than it is for me to meet a person that I don't like. But it is, um, they're too variable. But I can see but I also see what you mean by the spirit of the cat at the same time. And so, do I like the spirit of the cat? Yes, I guess I could say that. Um, But dog, that is like I definitely have a very deep connection to canines in general. Like, to the point that sometimes I think that maybe that truly, in fact, I think on the spirit, on the video where I'm talking about spirit animals, because like I said, these things are variable, they change. I think I was saying then that my spirit was a coy wolf, but I do have a very deep understanding, like my spirit ally, perhaps the best way to put it, is canines. Cats are pretty cool. I've never had one of my own. I have never had a cat of my own. Felix had a cat that sadly passed a little while. Well, quite a while ago now. My last dog passed just before I came up here to see Felix for the first time. And I expected her to stick around more after she died than she did, honestly. I mean, she did for a while. I even made a little doll, but you know, she faded after a while. I still see her in the car every once in a while, but I haven't. Since my ability to drive in Canada as an American has lapsed, I haven't been able to insure that car or anything, so I haven't been driving it. So I haven't seen her in a very long time. Tarantula seems like kind of an interesting pet. I want to have a jumping spider. I've been seeing that thing where people have pet jumping spiders. That idea fascinates me. I think a jumping spider would be a very fun pet to have. But this whole idea of wearable tulpas, yeah, you can actually get ones that are, if you want to call it, for lack of a better word, domesticated. I'm sorry, having a little coughing fit. Give me just a moment. Let me get this under control. I also don't have my vape today. So, anyways, yes, they have jumping spiders, and they even have ones that have been bred in in cages for a few generations now. So they tend to be a little more friendly. But I've found just wild jumping spiders are often be quite friendly. I have a connection with spiders as well. Speaking of all this, but it's more because I wound up getting a connection with a spirit that, well, I wound up having a lot of interaction with Iktomi. And once I started interacting with Iktomi, spirits or spiders and I had a wider connection than before. And speaking of, you can even essentially inherit these kinds of connections. Like the owls, which you'll see I have owls. There's one on my out back there, I got one on my neck here. I always liked owls. I've always liked owls. Even though the Native American thing, there's a whole superstition around owls. And a lot of my cousins don't like owl stuff at all. But my nanny, my grandmother, she's always had owls in her house. She loved owls. Like her family would be like, not looking up in her house sometimes because she's got pictures of owls all over the walls and stuff. She loved them. And I think that was her spirit. I think that was her animal spirit. But after she passed, I suddenly have this huge connection with owls, and they're everywhere. And like a lot of times, owls will let me get real close to them, and rather than flying away, they'll just look at me. And one of the few times I've done DMT, the first thing I see is the owl lady, and there's all this connection to owls that it was like I inherited this connection after my grandmother died. This isn't something that happened before that. And you can also gain these alliances. For example, yellow jacket wasps, and wasps, all wasps, to some extent, I've gained a connection with them that isn't something I was born with, but rather just happened when I was roofing when I was 18 years old and was watching them go in and out of the soda cans and started just kind of giving them some soda. And I've somehow began to understand that that particular wasp, the yellow jacket, because they have little tiny colonies, were anarcho socialists just like me, anarcho communists. And we had essentially a political understanding and a political alliance. And ever since then, I've had a real groove with wasps. We just have an understanding, to the point that, like, there's a few times where I was in danger, and how I got warned is a wasp stung me. And I know that's kind of rotten, but, like, yes, vaguely painful, but I actually am pretty much immune to bee venom because I got stung so much as a kid. Well, let's say I have a really high tolerance to bee venom to the point that even a wasp stinging me just as a little poke to me, you know. So they have warned me several times, and I have an alliance with butterfly as well. And it's actually another one that is a watcher spirit that lets me know about different types of dangers. And that comes from a time that I freed a butterfly from an old cobweb that no longer had a spider in it. And ever since then, butterfly just kind of returned the favor. So kindness to animals can gain you access to the spirit, to the collective consciousness of these things. That seems to work best with insects. There seems to be a deeper connection to the collective consciousness of the animals in general with your insect kingdom than with your higher order thinking species. I don't know. Some insects seem incredibly intelligent, but it seems like there's just a deeper connection there. Maybe it's because they have the ability. Maybe it's like is connected to like the ability of how insects can create a hive mind. But this reciprocity thing seems to work really well with insect spirits. Like I said, the thing where I connected with owl, or not with owl, with the butterfly happened after saving one butterfly. Now there's this kind of connection with butterflies in general. So you can gain animal spirits or totems as you age. And this is part of that whole shamanistic paradigm. Now, as I was about to say on that end, um, the whole idea of the wearable tulpa, this taking on of those roles, that's where I originally got this concept from. Like I call it a wearable tulpa. Sounds like chaos magic. This is something that is of a shamanistic tradition. All this shape shifting, soul shifting, morphing into other forms. This comes from a shamanistic background. This is things that I was taught as a child about how I could be, about how I could, yeah, about how I could take on different animal spirits. I could purposely take on this animal spirit for this task, become that animal inside. And that's part of the animal spirit thing. But it's where I got the idea for the wearable tulpas that I create. And not even just that, because there's the taking on of the roles in ritual, of taking on the role of the god by putting on his face, by putting on the mask of his face. And we can even take advantage of this with the creation of a mask. If we're really wanting to work with this wearable tulpa idea, but we're having trouble with um, the visualization, we're having trouble getting it to really work for you, what you can do is make a paper mache mask. Paper mache is easy as heck. It's just wet toilet paper. Or it can be round up newspaper with glue and water. But just wet toilet paper works. Put it on a thing, dry it, it'll come out hard and stiff. And you can make a mask this way that you can put. I mean, if you're gonna make a mask that you're gonna wear from toilet paper, it should probably be a few layers thick, maybe add some glue. Because my memory tells me it's stiff enough, but that sounds a little crazy. I haven't done that since I was a kid. My nanny actually was the one that taught me that trick. She had like a snowman and a Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus, that all of it, she said, was made from toilet paper. Anyways, um, yeah, the whole that concept of soul shifting is a very shamanic idea. And we've talked before about how to do it, but it simply comes down to playing. Okay, so what else is important here? I don't know if I really have much more to say on Gnosticism or the priestcraft stuff. Um, these things can be important though. A lot of the stuff in the priestcraft, this is important to if you're going to be doing any kind of work for other people. If you be doing readings, you need to understand how to interact with the people that you're speaking to. How that understand that speaking with confidence, understand the amount of confidence that you speak with is going to affect how seriously they take the reading. And that's a double-edged sword, right? You don't want them to just complete. If you're not completely sure of what it's saying in the reading, you don't want them to be completely sure of it either. And people need to understand when you're doing a reading that that's how things are right now. The future is never written in stone until after it has happened, and even then, it's questionable. Even afterwards, some question as to whether we can change things, right? But the future is certainly never written in stone. All things are malleable until the moment they occur. So that needs to be taken into account when we're doing divination and speaking with the amount of confidence that we speak something with. And if someone we make someone so totally sure something is going to happen that they don't try, well, I feel like I'm getting way off track there. Except for that priestcraft is important when you're doing that kind of thing, but especially when you're doing healing work, yeah? Because part of what's going on with any healing work is that's why they call it faith healing, is you need to create faith in the person that's going to work. The same is true with pills, even though the actual doctor, the more you believe he's done the right thing, the more likely you are to get better. But still, if you're doing the Reiki and stuff, you this is certainly an area where you do need to have some of that emotional understanding of how to make the person feel like they are getting better. Make the person feel like what is going on helps. I've talked about this before in relation to exorcisms. Sometimes you go to somebody's house, they've believed themselves into having a ghost so much that they've created a ghost. They've created a tulpa. And the only way you're going to get rid of it is by convincing them that it's gone. So sometimes this priestcraft stuff does matter, right? It does have an effect. Well, that's odd. Yeah, some people come up with some crazy stuff. Dedicated in your interaction with. There I go stuttering. You referenced it, the interaction in your song dedicated to the demiurge. Well, there we go. There's some bit about Gnosticism. I'm just going to read your thing out, I guess. I once got accused by a practitioner who claimed to be a Gnostic Luciferian of worshiping the demiurge and knowingly worshiping evil due to my being a sorcerer of Samael. I found that so absurd, I referenced the interaction in my song dedicated to the demiurge. So, there's a good reason to go, if you go listen to Max the Mantis's song dedicated to the demiurge, you know, a little bit of the backstory, a little bit of the mythology behind the song. And like I said, that's an important part of any moment, is to know the back history, the stories that go into making everything, because that's all everything is weaved from, is the mythology and metaphor of what it was. You know, Plato was mentioned even a little bit earlier in this idea of the forms. That's essentially what shamanism is talking about. There is forms behind everything. There is a form of deer, the spirit of deer, and it changes over time, and everything is moving and interacting. But there's a metaphor within that larger spirit. There's a metaphor with how each spirit interacts with each other. You know, when you hear a story, when you hear a myth and it says, so rabbit did this and then deer did that, so wolf did this, they're talking about that, about the metaphors given life into a story, about that spirit of each animal. Oh, I got something in my eye all of a sudden. Oh, hey, Kira. Good to see you. We're approaching the end of the live here. I'm just kind of summarizing everything that we've talked about. We're talking about the LiberNull and the Psychonaut. We read the shamanism parts, or not just the shamanism. We did the shamanism, Gnosticism, and Priestcraft. Now we're talking a bit. I'm just kind of going back through it all. The Priestcraft does have some useful things. We're gonna next time we're gonna do magical weapons. Tempted to do just that, but it's only 2.5 pages. Magical paradigms. Probably. Oh, this looks like it could be quite interesting. Let's see. Getting towards the end of the book. Okay, so just so that we have 2 more times to go, we're going to go from magical weapons to magical paradigms. So that's just 187 to 200, like 13 pages. I'm going to put this there and this here so I know what to read for next time. Okay, so Priestcraft. I did like what he had to say about social structure, because I mean, what was one nice thing about when I actually was in a coven. It was nice to have some social structure, but it was all hierarchical, you know, high priestess was the first amongst equals, which basically meant she told everybody else what to do and got to decide everything. I forgot I need to clean that pipe out. Using the small one tonight. Anyways, I did find it interesting that Gnosticism had the what do you call it? Had a concept of the nothing. That's pretty cool, but trying to get back there seems odd to me. Like I feel like ultimately, well, I'm going to summarize my thoughts on Gnosticism one more time. It's weird. I thought I saw another comment come up and then it disappeared. So I'm going to summarize my thoughts on Gnosticism one more time. The way I understand it is there's the creator and everything is infinite. Infinite's out in the unknowable. Has no personal interest in what happens here. And then you've got the demiurge that kind of created this reality from the nothing, out of the nothing, and is trapped consciousnesses in it to experience suffering, essentially. And then from there, that Yahweh, Yabeldoth, demiurge, what do you want to call it, incarnated itself as Jesus. And then Jesus was like, wow, I fucked up. There's a lot of suffering here. Why did I make all these things exist? And then some reason that didn't affect the larger piece. So you've got Jesus is trying to tell you how to get over the idea of existing and convince yourself that the material plane is completely useless because it's temporary, and it is the temporality of it all that makes everything have no meaning. This I strongly disagree with. I feel like things being temporary is part of what creates their beauty. It is the change and lack of constants that makes each moment matter in that pattern. But yeah. And so from there, we're essentially trying to get back to the point that we all accept that we are nothing and go back to